We're recording.
Great, we'll call the Bartlett Finance meeting for May 10th, 2024 to order. It's noon. Sharon will make note of who's in the room and who's online. First thing up is approval of the agenda. Is there any changes, additions or deletions to the agenda? Hearing none. Consider the agenda approved. Public participation. Do we have anybody here to from the public that wishes to address committee? Seeing none. Approval of minutes. We have the April 12th, 2024 minutes in the packet. My other two committee members are online. I've got Deb and Shelley. Do one of you want to make a motion about the minutes?
I'll move to approve the minutes as presented.
Good. That was Deb. Shelley, would you say something so we can just make sure we've got you here?
Send it.
Okay, we got you here. Okay, great. We'll consider those approved. And we are to the March 2024 CFO report. Joe?
Thanks, Max. So for the month of March, gross revenues decreased slightly while net increased by roughly $440,000. We saw a good month of collections, so that kind of brought that down to bad debt contractual reserve, which netted us more net income over the month. So I think there is some tweaks I need to make to the contractual model, but I think it's more conservative. That's conservative. Pretty much look forward. Expenses, there are major variances noted in your packet. I think would still be contract labor, high mobile areas. We need to work on that. We should start seeing more significant decreases as we have a bunch of CNAs starting up here. We continue to clean up our books as well. We are waiting on CBJ to give us some more CIP information. There was one major expense we posted for the parking lot study that was done as a CIP project versus an expense. For the month, we had an operating loss of 5.13%, roughly $740,000 short of our 3% margin goal. On net loss of roughly 3%. The balance sheet decreased cash decrease. We did move all Wildflower Ports cash over into our accounts during the month of April, which was roughly $1.95 million, what we transferred over into funds. So we'll see those on our balance sheet this month. We're working on getting the rest of that tied out. We've had some staff out, so it's kind of slowed that process. We're starting to see some cash collections from Wildflower Port accounts. There were some issues with Medicaid, which was bulk of the AR, and they're holding up some of that. I have Tammy basically doing daily calls with them trying to get stuff rolling. We did include some additional information this month in your packet. There is a ratios sheet, so we put some key ratios that are for movies, just to compare ourselves against some of the industry standards. The ones I focus on the most are AR days, which are high. I'll go over some more detail on those. Days cash on hand, which is about 12 below the industry average, the 167 where we want it. That is also artificially low. When we get our collection dollar AR clip, that should pop up closer to the 107 mark, assuming we don't continue to see massive operational losses. So overall, it's showing us as, kind of struggling financially with margins. We have an older plant, and then we're kind of got more debt than the industry average as a hospital. So that's something we're going to track, trying to fix that up. We have more metrics in the industry as well. There's also a set of financial statements that tie to the overall. There's kind of a budget format. So you guys continue to see that on a monthly basis moving forward, so you can see the programs we're looking at. So I'll try to maintain that as we go through these changes as well. And I don't know if there's any questions on any of those pieces.
The days cash on hand, if we converted, I was just trying to think it through back in the Wildflower Court receivables into cash. which those should turn to cash pretty soon, right?
Yeah,
What does that do to our number of days cash on hand?
if we get them collected, well, I was doing some estimates of where it should actually run on a monthly basis. I figure it brings us to about 102 days cash.
So, which is still significantly below the 6 months, which is what Moody's is saying. And that, but that's just the wildfire core. We also have some other receivables collections issues that you're working. to.
Yeah, so I pulled some details. That was one of the questions the board posed in the meeting last time. So Bartlett's currently sitting just below $21 million net, and so we'd like to get that closer to the 19 range, $19 million. So we're working on that internally. We'd also, since we have the addition of
Excuse me,
NSC.
that the 19 million excluding wildfire. though, right?
Yes, that's just Bartlett. That's core services, Bartlett and Meditech. We added anesthesia to our line in December. I think collections are starting to pick up a pace, but they've added about almost 600,000 to net AR as well. Wildfire court is just short of $10 million on the net side. And then you have home health and hospice, which are about 345 and 351. And then we have $130,000 in prices. So there's some pieces out there that won't work, that should bring this down, but we have work in-house to do as well.
So then if we hit your target, do you know what that would do to your days cash? If you hit your target for AR for the Sparlow side? Maybe 102, just whatever it was.
Might be able to get it to 110. I mean, there's so many
not
pieces,
huge.
but it's not huge.
Yeah.
It's not enough to make a difference. I mean, this is gonna take us some time to get to where we want to be.
Right. Thank you.
We haven't received a number yet on home health, still waiting on that to get the billing started up. I have Tammy, our billing TFS director downstairs now has access to the program for home health and hospice billing, so she's working with them to get that as I set up. The critical access hospital discussions.
Can we go to the hospice and home care billing here real quick?
Yep.
Does your staff have adequate access to the data? I mean, I know that we've had these disparate systems that we've been doing in from wildfire court, from hospice and home care. And is that at a point where, you feel like you've got the access to be able to look at, the quality assurance side, we have the documentation in
I
place?
think we're continuing to tweak that. So Heather's been working with Tammy downstairs and tweaking accesses to make sure that we have all the right stuff. Because before we send any bill out the door, there's gonna be a thorough audit. So when we start a new program, you can almost guarantee that Medicare is in full pin charts.
Yeah.
We need all of our first go to be super clean. So I know Tammy has access now, Rachel from HIN has access, so we're looking, yes,
The answer is yes.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Can you, what page was that on that you're talking about me, so she's been trying to put that up there, is that?
Are you talking, well, we're page 10 was the ratios that we were looking at.
Some of the stuff I'm talking through, it won't be in the detail, it's just questions that were generated from our last meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, and then some of them are doing.
Max had an additional question about employee benefits and the discrepancy there. So what I could find is most of it's in the budget side. So I validated our numbers and what we're doing is 100% accurate from what the city has. But what I found is it seems like we budgeted everyone the full load for health, dental, and the whole thing. And that's just not the case. We have a lot of people that have, like a spouse has insurance, so they don't elect ours or they pick up pieces of it. So that seems to be the base piece. The biggest difference between budget and actual is the people that don't have the full load of health insurance.
So we budgeted so everybody was gonna.
Yeah, and that's not what's actually happening.
That's just not the case. Do we have opt-out here? I don't even know if we have opt-out for health insurance.
If you have the plan, it's my understanding.
Do employees?
We also have a new cost plan.
Is there an opt-out value to the employees? In other words, do we pay them? We don't know. Okay.
There's also a question on balance sheet line 24, the increase. And when we dug into that, it was the lease liability and there's some personal liability built into that. So it's CIVITA, which was
Yeah.
GASB changes. Regulation that drove that.
Okay.
That's the end of my monthly financial report, monthly questions.
Committee questions for Joe, Deb, or Shelley?
I don't have any questions.
Board, any questions? Lisa? None? All right. We're kind of getting into the meat of our deal today, so BRA Sustainability Decision Points Recovery Plan, Joe. Where is this Joe?
Yeah, I'll pick some stuff and all the hard questions I'll shoot over him. If you want to go down to the first slide in that presentation, there you go. We can just go ahead and slide down to the next slide. And so in the first slide, we're just trying to give a background as to why we're doing this. You know, we ran a negative margin of roughly $10 million on the cash side for multiple years in a row to a point where it's decision point time. Then we talk about the services that we've kind of scoped out as non-core through the budget process. And we've also put out there a proposed timeline. I know Hal asked about that specifically, and then we went over it with Max and Kenny the other day. And so what we'd like to accomplish today, May 10th, is go through the decision point presentation, and then Ian will go through management's recommendations with the hope of moving those forward to the full board for approval at that May 28th meeting. And so we'll go do the decision points at that for the members that aren't here, and then the board can give us direction on what we want to do forward. We have a CBJ BRH joint meeting scheduled tentatively for May 29th. And we can take the board's recommendations to them for comment, and then we'll open up a community feedback engagement period, which we'll have Aaron with on that. With the hope of coming back to the finance committee on the week of June 21st for that finance committee in June for review, community feedback, and then make a final. So it's a final recommendation for the board to approve, move that forward to that meeting in June. That makes sense to everybody.
Yeah. I just want to make sure we're kind of focused on that, Devin, Shelley, especially, and the other board members here. And so I'm focused mostly on that fourth bullet on the community feedback, so that, the idea today is for us to get an idea of what management is thinking they want to do for each one of these areas, right? They've done a tremendous amount of work. And I appreciate the amount of work that the two of y'all and you folks sitting over there are putting into stuff, because I know it has been a huge undertaking. We appreciate it. And so we're going to be learning about each one of these here, and then hearing from Ian and Joe what the recommendations are, and then forwarding that to the board for review. But it's just kind of the first cut of the board, as I understand it, we talked about. And we'll be discussing on the next day and with the assembly in that meeting with them, the next bullet down, which is the community feedback and engagement period, is, I think that's super important. I think everybody's thinking that's important, that, we design a way that we can make sure that do you have something you want to share with us on that today? Is that where you go?
I do have called them. So.
Okay. I'm calling on you.
Thank you. So I discussed this with Ian, our CEO, yesterday, and put together some initial ideas just for the board to think on and react to. And of course, we can modify any of this. But looking at the proposed timeline, the board obviously takes public comment at every meeting, but issuing a formal notice of public comment, we would really take a lot of proactive steps to let the community know this is what's happening and here are opportunities to engage with us. So if we open that period on May 29th, we could have a 3-week window before closing it on June 19th, 2 days ahead of your next finance committee meeting. And within that 3-week window, we could do a number of things. The first would be, we could issue a news release to the local media announcing that a formal period of written feedback, public comment period is open, and list out opportunities for community members to engage with us, and hope that local news media picks that up and helps us publish those opportunities. I would recommend that the board consider hosting at least 2 kind of community town hall evening sessions here on campus, where members of the community can come in, hear an abbreviated presentation from senior leadership, and be available to answer questions. How kind of a town hall forum where anyone from the community can ask questions, hear this same information, and potentially as well consider a means to collect public feedback during those sessions. In addition to that, I'd recommend that we build out a specific page on the hospital website where folks can read the same information, either these presentations, recordings that we have, synthesize all that information for them, and then provide a mechanism for folks to put in written public feedback, because we know not everyone will be able to attend. But that's something we could build out as well. And then we can pull all that together in advance of the next finance committee meeting on June 21st. Another opportunity as well is we could work on another op-ed to run in the Juneau Empire to help, again, re-encourage folks to pay attention to these conversations and hear all the different avenues that they can participate. So those were some of my initial thoughts that I put together.
Great.
Happy to hear feedback.
Did you want to add anything to that, Ian?
No, that's very consistent with their discussion. I would only say that, we're at this point simply because the board as well as the assembly members asked us to do a deep dive into these areas and to make sure that not only do we the analytics, but we also have input from the community so that when all is said and done and the board has to finalize their decisions, we feel comfortable that we've done our basic due diligence as well as incorporated the thoughts and concerns of the community. So I know it's a long, drawn out process, but I think given the nature of these programs and the importance of them, we need to go through them. So.
Great. Questions, Shelley or Debbie have questions for Aaron?
No, I think it's a good start. And just as Aaron said, it's going to be important that it's well publicized how people can give input.
I agree. What we don't want is for someone relatively and determine that they didn't know, you didn't let them know if he's coming in. So if we give every opportunity in the plan, thank you.
And I would assume, Aaron, you'd be using social media also.
Yes, of course, we would utilize all our avenues. Yep.
Debbie, you're a little garbled. I think you might just need to bring your mic a little closer when you talk. It'll probably clear that up. So Aaron, thanks for lining that out so quickly. That's awesome. So timing your in-house open house forums or whatever you call it, what are you thinking about in terms of timing for each of those?
Well, I think we need to have more than one because not everyone can stick to one.
Yeah.
In a 3-week period, I suggest we do a minimum of 2. If we could do more, I think that's something to gauge hospital leadership's calendars and what's feasible. I would certainly make sure we record them and then provide that as an additional means. So I would recommend evening sessions so folks can make arrangements to come after work hours and do something maybe like a 5 to 7 p.m. or something like that open house here on campus. If we feel like we have the sufficient space to host, if not, we should probably consider maybe another space in the community like a school or community library. I'm not sure what to expect in terms of in-person participation.
You could do the first one and find out, right?
Sure.
Next.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that, first of all, this is a great plan, and I know Max and I spent some time also talking about this too, so I'm really glad to see this. I want to make sure that the board hears these comments, that it's not just staff. So I think that the 2 meetings, which I actually thought we'd only do 1, but I think 2 is great. I want them to be board meetings because I want to have as many board members there that possibly can be, because it's really important that the board hears what the community wants. So when the board makes the recommendations to the assembly or when the board makes the decisions with the input from staff and with the input from the community, that the board has all the information for them. And it's not, the information is not just going to the staff. So this process should be really directed towards the board because the staff already has their recommendations to us. So now the community is going to give their recommendations or their thought to the board. So they have to be board.
We'll incorporate that. I think it's great.
Do we need to wait until after the 29th? I mean, could we do one, for example, the week of the 20th? We're sitting here today at the 10th and we got a full week next week. We could do one week of the 20th. I mean, the board hasn't taken any action, but that'll help us to take action, when we hear some input. What do you think about that? If your idea of doing at least two makes sense and,
Yeah.
potentially even more.
Next up, I'm sorry, sir. Our problem is that we haven't even presented this to the board yet. And that's gonna be the
Yeah.
first part is on the 28th. So I agree with you. We're a little bit almost in front here.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Okay, so if we're waiting until the 29th, after the 29th, then maybe we shoot for right after that, like the 30th or something like that with the
I
plan.
think as soon as possible in the front end and then a week or two after. In this interim period between finance today and then your board meeting, we could work asynchronously to look at everyone's calendars and
Great.
have potentially at least 2 dates to propose. If they are going to be board meetings, it would give the board at your meeting at the end of this month the opportunity to see the proposed dates in advance. Everyone could check their calendars, but then also we could have a chance to check hospital leadership calendars as well. I'd want to make sure that we have all the right folks in the room to provide this information to the community similar to what's being done today, but then also help answer questions. And then, yes, make sure that board members are there to hear that. And then we'd need to add it to the board calendar for approval as additional meetings.
Sounds good. Bill?
Let's go on down to the next slide, Jerry. So we've included our strategic document, our strategic plan that the board approved here. So these are the high level goals that we have. And I just want to highlight the optimize and drive strategical clinical growth. And so in that goal, one of our goals is sustainability through optimizations and operations, selective investment, and then service line growth. And so what we're really focused on here is sustainability, the hospital and the core entity as we move into the future. That's all I got on that one. Move on to the next slide. So what we've done here is we've kind of laid it out in the same format that we presented the budget in. So we have the hospital, wildfire report, enterprise fund on the left. We have RRC, which is rainforest recovery, is the first one. ABA, which is, I'll say this one, I don't get trouble.
Adolescent behavioral health.
Applied behavioral analysis. We have the new crisis center. We have BOPS, home health. And hospice. So I'm going to start with RRC as highlighted. So for FY25 financials, we have a budgeted revenue of 1.77 billion with expenses of 2.55 million, that's us a loss of 782,000 for the year. So when we did a historical dive into RRC, it's been heavily subsidized by CBJ and grant revenue for a number of years. So when we go down to the options matrix, what we can do, not just yet. So we've kind of broken out what we can do with each of these programs in the 4 different areas. Can we increase the reimbursement, reduce the cost? Can it be subsidized by another entity, or do we need to close the program? So when we look at RRC specifically, can we increase reimbursement? And so when we consider that, can we have a meaningful increase in reimbursement without any change in expenses? And so as we looked at this, I think that most of us came to the conclusion that there's nothing we can do in that. When we look at reducing costs, RRC operates at kind of a base staffing level. And so to decrease costs would be to basically shut the program down, because the staffing for one patient is the same as staffing for 6 patients relative, if that makes sense to everybody. And so that leaves us with the subsidized option and the closed option. Moving on to the next slide.
Actually, before we get on, when you say subsidize, what do you mean by subsidize?
So subsidize is what we're looking at is, can we find someone to help fund this program like CBJ did on long term? So what we're looking for is permanent subsidy of a program to consider, right? And so is CBJ willing to give us the alcohol and tobacco tax on a permanent basis? Some way,
For example.
for example, to help support this program in the long term.
So really, we're probably, when we think about subsidized, we're thinking about CBJ. Right? I mean,
CBJ is going to be the first one we actually consider. I mean, other than that, I don't know what immediate avenues we have for subsidy. I don't know if there's any other entities in the community that would be willing to step forward.
I think too, Max, excuse me, I think too, it's very important that you said a word that started the whole thing, permanent subsidized funding, because if it's not permanent, then we're just gonna be back in this situation again next year. Is that correct?
Yes, and I'll talk about, when I get into the history of RRC, we'll talk about how we got subsidy and then we'll get it away. That's where we end up.
Okay.
So, yeah, we were very intentional about where to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next slide, Sharon. So with the history of RRC, I'm just gonna be brief on some of this. I'll let you guys kind of read the information. We took this over, the city gifted this program in 2000 to manage, and then permanently in 2003 with tax funding that went along with it. So we received money from the general fund, alcohol tax, and tobacco tax for multiple years. We have some of the examples up there. So in 2005, we received $1.6 million in tax money and grants. We've had a reoccurring grant that's actually averaged somewhere between $500,000 and $700,000 a year for this program. On the CDJ tax side, we've received somewhere between $1 million and $1.5 million. With the best year of funding coming in FY19 at just under $1.5 million. Since then, and with the COVID, I think in the reduction of staffing, they ratcheted back the subsidy from the city down to $693 and then to $518 and now to $0 in FY24. And then there was nothing in the budget for FY25.
So Joe, so just to kind of paraphrase it, this program has lost money on an operating basis since the 90s, since the CBJ was operating.
1993 is what I could figure.
Yeah, so it lost money when CBJ had it. They gave it to Bartlett. Bartlett, it operated at a loss when Bartlett had it, but there was subsidy money that kind of kept it afloat. But it's never been a self-sustaining program.
No,
The
it's never
expectation
been
that it
profitable.
could ever be would be fallacy, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So we started digging into the program and some of the stuff that went into it. We looked at the payer mix. It is 89% Medicaid, 5% commercial, a little bit of private in there. 40% of the patient population are CBJ residents, so 60% of the people we see in the residential side come from outside the CBJ. We are currently operating at base staff, which I talked about before. There are 4 residential treatment programs that we could find on Medicaid on the DOH's site in Southeast Alaska and 30 programs statewide. RRC cared for 316 unique patients during the last 3 years, with 25 patients receiving care more than once. So we see roughly 105 patients a year in RRC, 41 of them are ours. Does that make sense to everybody?
I just want to just clarify. So you're saying that approximately every year we see about 100 patients
Ish, yeah.
and only 40 of them are Juneau residents and 25% of them are repeat people?
25 total of the 316, so I would assume, some of them are repeated more than once.
Okay.
We're getting the data was kind of tough, so I can't really give you specifics on.
Okay.
Question, sorry.
Oh, no, that's no problem. I just wanted to see, so only 40 Juneau patients.
Yeah, so over the 40, we had some reoccurring.
Okay, that's, thank you.
Through the
So that-
chair,
Yeah, go ahead, John.
is there a specific outlying community that has more patients that come, or is it a equal spread across Southeast?
I didn't dive into that specific data. We just tried to focus on what was Juneau's. I didn't dig into what was coming from outside.
Okay.
Are any of these search beneficiaries?
There are search beneficiaries now. I was actually trying to pull specific data because I thought that question would come up and I was struggling getting it. So we have this by insurance carrier, not by primary. So the search insures a lot of their beneficiaries, which comes in as, Medicaid or commercial. That's what I see.
Yeah.
So we've had sustained losses for multiple years. FY25, we are projecting to continue that loss pattern. There are some grants that we did figure into the budget next year, but then there was some offsets, plus or minuses. We're projecting to end FY24 at a roughly $800,000 loss. So it's real close to what we budgeted for next year.
So there's no subsidy, and when you look at the 25 column and the actual collections, 1.769, none of that is subsidy.
No, that's agent collection.
And there's no subsidy we're gonna get in 25.
We received a small grant, it was like $277,000 or $270,000,
Okay.
which doesn't show into this.
So with that, that means that we're approximately $500,000 in the black or in the red for,
When I ran it through March, we were at $600,000 almost on to the dollar for FY 24 in the election.
so,
So if we end up the year, we don't change anything for the $800,000 in FY.
and you're
With the
saying
grant.
about the same thing in 2025.
Yeah.
That is, I would only add, those are operating losses. It doesn't necessarily take into account future dollars to replace buildings and roofs with these patients in and remodel. So the operating loss is important, but we also, in some programs, have debt service. So when you look at subsidization, you not only have to look at the operating, but also is there any other thing that you need to have to be able to replace? For example, like paying principal and interest.
This doesn't include any overhead either, does it?
No, so this doesn't include EBS, doesn't include facilities, billing, accounting, overhead.
But to Ian's point, it's our actual carrying costs of this program is actually much higher than 2.5, but all we're capturing really here is just the direct operating costs.
I could tell you in FY 23, there was a $3 million allocation from our cost report of overhead costs to ROC,
How much?
$3 million.
Holy cow.
So some of it's dictated by square footage.
Is any of that avoidable? In other words, do we have, and I'm not looking for specifics, but just in general, is some of that overhead, you have some overhead costs, we gotta have a CFO no matter what we do, right? But are there other costs that potentially would be overhead that would be avoidable? I mean, I guess some of the facility costs that Ian talks about might be if we close the place down. Are there others too? And if the answer is I don't know, then that's fair.
I probably don't think it'd be a real good answer.
Okay.
And I just want to clarify too, this doesn't include debt services or anything. This is just operation.
I don't, there's no debt service on this one, but when we get to the crisis center, the others.
We do have depreciation in the budget.
But Joe, the blank at the bottom there, the board recommendation blank, that is on every one of the slides that follows here, that's where we're headed. I mean, I guess I'm just wanting that everybody wrap their head around the fact that, ultimately, we're gonna have to make a recommendation to the assembly and also direction to management. That's the way we want to go, right? That's what we're going for with our timeline. You touched on either subsidy or close. And if subsidy isn't likely, it really leaves us kind of with one option here. Is that fair?
Are you switching to management's recommendations?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, why don't I take it over for Joe? Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman. As you know, not only the assembly, city manager, the board asked us to provide our view of what we need to do with these programs. With this program, it not only cannot cover its direct costs, cannot cover its overhead costs, and is reducing the reimbursement on the hospital side because of Medicare cost-based reimbursed. We only really have two options. One option is either to seek subsidization. That would have to be dollars that are permanent, or at least, minimum 5-10 years, that cover the cost, cover overhead costs. Or we have to close. And so I don't know if there's the possibility of getting the city to provide a way of subsidization. That's out of my control, but with the things that are in my control, I'd recommend closure.
What are the options for the patients, the 40 Gino patients? If we do close.
Thank you to the chair. That's a great question. It's a difficult situation because, those residents would look at potentially having to go out of Juneau for services. There is potential that they could get some wraparound services, so to speak, through Bob's on an outpatient kind of setting. But they are, according to the Department of Health website, there are multiple programs now we are 3.5 and the other programs in around, some of them are a 3.1. And frequently before you get into the 3.1, you have to go kind of graduate from a 3.5 program before you go into 3.1. So that could be a challenge for limited access to that.
So if the 3.5 goes away, so like, for example, GHS is a 3.1 and they're actually expanding that program, I think, right now. And so if there's not a 3.5 program, they couldn't access a 3.1, is that what I'm hearing?
That is my understanding, and I know we have Jen Carson on, and I can punt to her. She's much more skilled in that area, but I do believe that that's the process.
Yeah, Jen, would you mind weighing in on that?
Yep, Kim's correct in that. So there's many factors that that come out of the national standards for substance use care. And that's one of them. Some of those are looking at changing, but I don't within the next year, but I believe that they're still going to have to go through some of these different treatment processes that federally they have laid out for us. I don't know if that helps.
It does. So the 3.5 programs would be by definition. I mean, are there any in Southeast besides us? Or is
No,
it
no,
Fairbanks?
we are the only one. And the team has also let me know that the one that we have is preferred for many people in the state because we're a shorter program. Many of the other 3.5s are a little bit longer than we're roughly a 30-day program. And so for a lot of people, 30 days is kind of what they want, they prefer.
Yeah. Can you give us a real brief, what's the difference between 3.1 and 3.5 on a community and services provided, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I'm probably not the best to give that information, but I'll do my best. So it's kind of the level of treatment that they receive. I can also actually, I see that a couple of my staff are on and they would probably be able to describe this a little bit better than me because they live it every day, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So Rebecca is on, she's the program manager for Rainforest. So I'd be happy to have her jump on.
Yeah, great. Rebecca, can you join us? Must have stepped away for a minute.
Or doesn't realize she's on mute.
Oh, yeah, well, there's that one too, right? If you are talking, you're on mute, Rebecca. You know, Jim, maybe the way to handle this too, and also in the interest of time is if, you know, if you guys, I don't want to spend a ton of time, but it'd probably be good information for the board to understand the service hole that potentially the closure of this program will create. I think that's a fair question for us. And so that, you know, so to that end, the difference between 3.1 and 3.5 and what those, you know, folks' options might be. What is
Yeah.
that?
We would be happy to get something together for you.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on then.
Well, you know, one other thing that comes to mind about Rainforest Recovery is the building. I don't know what shape the building's in, but I know it's been there for over 40 years. So it's not a new building. And there's gonna be costs involved in that.
Yeah. You know, when we think about our average age on our campus, it's pretty, you know, that's one of the older ones for sure.
We did do some work on that building last year, or 2 years ago.
Okay. Any other questions from Shelley or from Deb or anybody else about this issue? So
I have none. None.
I guess it seems to me that we need to at least kind of give something for the full board to chew on with respect to each one of these, Deb and Shelley. And I think we want to understand a little bit better. Jen's going to help provide that, help us understand. But I guess if I was thinking about where to go with this, I would say you know, we need to ask the hard question of CBJ, is, do you guys want to have a dedicated funding stream to make this thing work? Or do you want us to close this thing? And, you know, I guess there's maybe an intermediate recommendation too, which is, do we know if there's any other providers that potentially would want to take this over? I mean, I don't know if that's an option out there or not, Ian. You
Yeah,
know,
that was an option. I think we just haven't explored it.
haven't explored it yet, yeah. So, I can tell you that it would be a difficult undertaking for whoever takes it over because, you know, you're starting from less than zero. So I guess that's my thinking, right now, Shelley and Deb, is that we, you know, just inform the board that management has made these recommendations. It seems to be consistent with what would be a responsible financial call. We need to look to see if there's other providers out there potentially that would want to take this over, but that unless, in the absence of a subsidy, Bartlett can't continue to do this.
I agree with that assessment.
I agree as well. It's unfortunate, but something's got to give, and this is. Are you hearing me better?
Yeah, we hear you great now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It's with reluctance that I say it, but I agree that unless we can find, our only options are to find someone to take it over or to close the facility in order for the core hospital to remain intact.
Yeah. And especially with only 40% of the patients being Juneau residents.
Yeah, I would add the funding that has been there in the past. I have had a front row seat for this stuff over the last 30 years when this was originally given from the CBJ to Bartlett. And there was a lot of concern at the time about Bartlett taking this over for the very reason that we're still grappling with this. And that funding, for me, would have to be a dedicated revenue stream. I mean, I don't think that we could say we want it for 5 or 10 years. To me, that's, 5 or 10 years will tick by in a hurry. It seems like there needs to be something like you go to the voters and you ask for a dedicated sales tax, or you ask for a dedicated mill rate that would provide, funding in perpetuity for these programs, right? And that it could also change over time, as if it's half a mil or something, whatever that would be, it would grow as assessments grow and so forth, But it would seem that if we're going to ask for a subsidy, it's not just, oh, can you restore $1 million a year to us? You need to do something a little bit better than that. Of course, they could direct us. You're going to get $1 million. You're going to keep it going. But our recommendation would be, to do that. So. Okay, any more on this, Lisa?
No, I agree.
Nothing more, okay. All right, next item.
Next slide we're gonna look at next program is ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis. So for the budget, we have $461,000 in net revenues, $1.1 million in expenses, with a net loss of $656,000. This is roughly the loss we've ran since we've taken on the program. It's been pretty consistent. When you look at the options matrix, we kind of ticked off all of the top 3 are not really options for us, unless that is for a very specific reason. If you want to go to the next slide. So as we dive into this, we just gonna go straight to the meat of it. The 2 providers in this program have resigned effective June 13th. And so notice was given to patients this morning. Staff know about it at this point. We've notified the rest of the staff about it. So the word's gone out. So their decision point was to move away from Bartlett and start their own program at this point. And so they've registered a business name, started contracting with payers. They've taken steps to open their own business at this point. I think we've done a letter of support to help them secure some space, maybe from the CBJ. And we're trying to support them in any way we can so they can be successful guarantee these services in the future for CBJ residents. There's specific questions on that.
I do, I mean, just one statement real quick. So just in all of this, this is like a really good outcome for our community. And it's really great that the providers that are actually doing the services right now are going to continue doing the services for this community. So this is like an excellent outcome, probably one of the best things that we could have asked for.
Are one of the two employees online? Either of the two?
They are not.
So they've given notice. They've given notice with the intent of starting their own program. They've asked for, I assume presumably in the schools is where they want to have their space, is that right? It's possible that there might be some extra empty school buildings here coming up in a couple of months. And so really what this does is it has the effect of your recommendation option, which was to close the program, right? So this is would seem to me, it would be a pretty straightforward recommendation that we cease the program effective when these people terminate on June 13th, correct? Is that too simplistic? No? Okay. All right, so Deb or Shelley, then I guess with this one, our recommendation would be that, management's recommending that with the departure of the employees, that we let the program wind down in whatever orderly fashion it needs to wind down at Bartlett, and then it goes away.
I'm
Sounds good.
I'm in agreement, but there are more than 2 employees there. Are they planning on taking the additional employees with them? Do we know anymore? I'm in agreement that plan makes sense. I'm just curious as to whether the other employees, and I can't remember, I can't remember if it's 7 or 9, have a landing spot.
Joe?
Do we kick that over to Chad or Kim?
Yeah, so there are 5 additional employees in that program. One is already scheduled to transition to our oncology clinic. And then the remaining 4, 2 of them have already met with my team to look for other opportunities within the hospital. The process would be equivalent to a layoff process. So they would, we'd work with them just like we would in any sort of layoff situation, really try and find them something else in the hospital that we do. But yeah, they would do we can find something else.
And then the other 2 employees, so there's 5, one's oncology, 2 have applied for transfers, and the other 2?
The other 2 are scheduled to meet with Tiffany.
So they will be.
Yeah, so we will, because we had a meeting with them yesterday, we told them that we would be reaching out to them, schedule meetings with all of them. 2 of them already preemptively had made those connections.
Yeah.
And the 2 leaders are obviously resigning.
Yeah, got it. Oh, so the 5 included the 2 leaders? Oh, there's 2, 5 plus 2.
2 leaders,
7.
4 people who will essentially be laid off.
Yeah.
Of those 4, 2 have already met with us, 2 were waiting to be
Waiting
with,
to, got it.
1 is transferred.
Does that answer your question, Deb?
It does. Thank you for that.
All right, moving on.
Next one just real quick thing. I kind of want to, I like the recommendation and I really want it to be as seamless transition as possible. I mean, and I know it's not going to be perfect because it's a new group, but I do want Bartlett to be able to support them. I know that we can't support them financially, but in any way possible that we can to make sure that it's successful for them. So
I would add, Joe, when Joe and I met with the city manager, he discussed it with the city manager about space. I know that they're talking about, can they buy some of their equipment from us at low cost? So I think you talked to him about
Yeah,
that too.
Rob was very open to discussing that with me, helping us along that path.
that's exactly what I like to hear. Thank you guys very much for doing that.
Okay, next.
Next is we have the crisis center. So with the crisis center, we're gonna have 2 of these specific slides. The first one's gonna go over the budget. So with the budget, we had a $2 million revenue budget, and that was based on the pro forma that was supplied by an outsourced company. Beck, with $3.2 million in expenses, which were reported as with that came up to a $1.2 million loss for the program. in 2025. So if we go down to the very next slide. Now that we have a couple months experience under our belt, we went through and did an estimate based on information we had at hand. So based on our first 3 months experience, extrapolated out for a full year, revenue is probably closer to 960,000 with a major variance in volumes between what we've actually seen and then what the pro forma was showing. When we discussed this with Doug Newbeck, what they kind of did for projections is they have some information on how many crisis visits they have per 100,000 population. And they actually increased that national average by 40% based on our geographic location. And so I think some of their estimates were a little rosy for on the revenue side. And then on the expense side, they kind of undershot on the expenses. So the pro forma showed a lower expense threshold than we're actually experiencing. And I'll show a little bit more of that information when we get to the next slide, but based on our estimate, we'll have a net loss of $2.2 million going into 2025 versus $1.2 million that we budgeted. So we go back down to the options matrix, increased reimbursement. Reimbursement can only be increased with the increased volumes, and so we have very little control over that at this point. We operated a base staffing, so costs are as low as they could potentially be today. So we go back to the same two options we kind of had in the first program, which is subsidize, close either meaning close the program, or I don't know if you could find a third party to run the crisis program in the city. The building that it is in was built with bond dollars that are tax exempt. So any service we want to put in that building would have to be a borrowed service. We can't rent that out to outside people at this point. Next slide. And so I'm not going to go real deep into the history on this one. It is a relatively new program. The current conditions are that we've seen low volumes. I have Jeanette pull some of the data, average daily census of less than one patient at this point. I think the pro forma showed an average daily census of 3 on the residential side, and a 23% utilization of the observation of the program. So what we have up here is we have revenue and expenses for the pro forma, some estimates, and our budget. And so when you look at the FY20 pro forma, you can see that they had budgeted $2 million they had in revenue, $2.6 million in expenses with a loss of $577,000. So this is the pro forma minus the adult side that we can't open at this point. When we included the adult programs, the pro forma showed a loss that was a little bit closer to break even for operating expenses. We'll go to our FY24 estimate. So this is an estimate based on this current year, how we'll end on a year-to-date basis, not a full year, right? So we opened the program in December, and we're anticipating seeing roughly $1 million operating loss from this program in this fiscal year over the, when we end June. The FY20 pro forma is come straight from the pro forma again, just the kids side, and then the estimate is based on the data we've collected up to the state, and that shows the $2.2 million net operating loss. You can see that the biggest change up there is revenue. We're about half of what the pro forma said. And then the FY25 budget, I just wanted to include that when we did that budget, it started in January. We less than a month's data to try and project those numbers. So I beg for forgiveness on that one. So when we analyze this, wages and benefits are going to far exceed any revenue that this program can ever achieve in our estimates. Even if we were able to get fully a full census every day of the year, I don't know if the program would actually break even, be totally honest. Direct. And this is a program that also, since it is in a brand new building, there are debt payments, which includes principal and interest.
I want to talk about that kind of separately.
Okay.
So Kim, why haven't we been able to get adults in there? I know we've heard this before, I'm just drawing a blank on it.
Here, I think originally the building design, it's a beautiful building. I think there was an oversight of how that would work with both programs. Ideally, you would have both sides of that building kind of mirror themselves. So you'd have adult, crisis here, adult residential here, and adolescent crisis here. The way the building is set up, it would be extremely difficult to it would either require the adolescent in crisis to go through our outpatient psychiatry area up to the elevator, hoping that an adult's not going up to the same floor, or to walk through the adult space to get up there. And so just really just kind of the flow to try to get that to work was really problematic to try to get two programs. It's just not designed the correct way to support two programs.
So there's not an easy fix for that.
You know, I mean, I guess anything's an easy fix, you throw money at it, but
Yeah.
the problem with that is I think that even if we, you know, we're able to get both of the programs in there, it's still gonna operate at a loss. I mean, it's just not sustainable, especially with the reimbursements and I don't have the reimbursements for the adult piece, but for the adolescents, you know, for the residential, it's $940 a day. And then the crisis piece it's $121 an hour. But again, the patients coming through, there's been a few private insurance that's come through, but most of the patients are Medicaid. And so you're getting just kind of what you're getting from that reimbursement.
Yeah. It's a daunting number to overcome, you know, I mean, that's. So do you feel, I guess, and I want to ask this of Kim, as far as the estimate of revenues, and I'm thinking back to some of the presentations we had in terms of volume. Do you feel comfortable that that estimate is in the ballpark of correct, that, you know, that's much lower than we were predicting it was going to be, that we're not seeing just, it's because it's so new, it hasn't fully, you know, that's, I guess, where I'm coming from.
We're just not seeing the volumes, I think, that were predicted in the original performance.
And why is that?
That is a great question. I think there's some, and Jen, you can feel free to jump in. I think there's some areas around the state that want to send kids to this program. The problem is it's gonna end up being very long-term. So it'll be 30 days, 60, you know, so kiddos that don't really have a firm like discharge plan. And under licensure right now, it's, you know, it's set up to be a short-term, 7-day.
Yeah.
But you know, the census that we're seeing now, a lot of that are repeat patients. So they're not new individuals coming in, they're, you know, it's the same individuals coming to seek the crisis or residential care.
So if there's 24 encounters, which is what Joe has on the slide here with you or whoever put that on it. It's so 24 encounters, if several of these have been multiple, it's 3, 4, 5 kids, is that?
Could be, yeah, Jen, you can correct me, but that's my understanding. We've had a couple of more encounters since then. But that's why we put encounters instead of patients, because it's the same, some of them are the same.
So it's a pretty small population. People utilizing Lisa.
Oh, I'm just, is it possible to apply for a program change to where it could become long-term treatment for adolescents?
That is a good question. I think there would be some different licensure requirements we'd have to go through and change, and probably some more. We'd have to look and see what the regulations are, the building itself, and to be able to switch the program.
But is there any money in that either?
You know, that's a good question. I'll have to get back to you. I think in general, you know, when you have a lot of these kiddos coming in that have Medicaid, your reimbursement is your reimbursement. Jen, I don't know if you have more information on that.
I don't. I would have to do more research on that.
So we have this beautiful new building over there that we built for a purpose that we're saying that isn't gonna be able to be sustainable. And we have debt service on this, that's revenue bond debt service, it's attached to the overall revenues of the hospital. So potentially we could use this building for other purposes.
Yeah, so as we look at expanding areas that could be revenue producing, that could help in the sustainability goal. I mean, it could be used for anything.
Do we have any sort of thoughts about what potentially those could be, or have we not gone that far down yet?
We've talked about it as an SLT team, just in concept, but I think what we've done is asked Nate to start following up what alternative uses that don't violate the bond covenants.
So the answer is it's still a work in progress, and I think.
Yeah, it is. And
Which is completely fair, I get it. I mean,
we didn't want to, presuppose the board's decision, but it is on our radar screen to look at alternatives.
Max,
Yeah,
so I'm really looking forward to hearing comments from the public and from everybody about this program. Part of the issue with this building is that this building came in way over cost of what the design was at first. So and we all know that. We all know, what happened there. Agnew Beck, who gave us a presentation on a performer on what we were supposed to expect, it was like way off. I mean, Joe has told us that they took an average and then they added like 40% or 50% on it, which, with a population of 100,000 versus a population of 30,000, even if you're talking about 55,000 of all of northern Southeast Alaska. So I know that we worked on this building for years, and I know that before you even came on this board, you were on the Economic Stabilization Task Force that this building was talked about. So it's a direct 180 turn from where we've been in the past, from ending a program like that or making a recommendation like that. So I think that we have to really think about this as a board, that if we continue with a program like this, which we all, I believe, in this room and online know that a program like this is really important to the community. The scary thing is that if we continue with the loss with a program like this, it's really going to cut into the core services of what our hospital is all about. And that's what's we really have to take into consideration as a board as we go forward. So I just wanted to put that out there and say that.
I also add, this is another program where you're only looking at the direct costs, right?
right.
There are other costs that have not been allocated to this yet. It also has debt service, as you already noticed. The interest is in the P&L. The principal is not. The principal does escalate over the next following years. In addition, it's also the type of program that basically allocates away cost-based reimbursement and demonstration program. So it's not only a loss, but it also hurts your reimbursement at the hospital side.
Which affects.
Right.
So going back, you were headed same place I was, King, which was, the 180-degree flip from when, we were planning this thing. Yeah, and so there was a lot of excitement, especially a lot of that happened right smack dab in the middle of COVID. And kids were dealing with a lot of stresses that, made something like this look really positive. Sure. And, so communicating that to the people that you guys are engaged with on this, Kim, through this program, the users of this thing, are they aware that this might, I know it's maybe not a lot, but I mean, what kind of reaction is that going to cause for these families that have been using this program?
I think that, and like people have said, this is a great program. It's just not sustainable by itself, right? And I think it's really, I think the adolescents that have used the program find value. The families definitely find value. There's resources because there's not any resource, right? We have resources for adults, but really not a lot for adolescents. So I think this will be a difficult one for the community. I think there'll be, will probably be a lot of comment I would expect surrounding this. And of course, none of those patients, unless they are listening currently or their families, don't know that this is.
This will be new. So one reason for the outreach, right? Nick.
I just, through the chair, I wanted to piggyback on, Kim's response to the pro forma, to just remind the committee today that when the pro forma was developed and when the building design was taking place, the state hadn't even finalized regulations for these programs. And so we're not now in a position where without significant additional investment, we could even try to meet what the pro forma envisioned. And so our teams did our very best to set up a program where we could start to identify what is real and what's not. Now we're at a point where, what was envisioned as the pro forma was being developed and what was envisioned as we were being advised on how to design this facility, we can't do that. So it's not, I don't say that as an excuse, but, we can't operate this program the way that we thought we might be able to.
Jim just wanted to remind us that regulations still aren't out.
Yeah.
They're still not out. Yeah, Lisa.
Well, this is an example of another program that the community has to decide whether or not they want. Because the utilization of it is small. I mean, these are adolescents that are in crisis, and even though we know we have mental health issues, majority of adolescents are not going to need this facility. So it comes down to a very small group, but it's also a very expensive program. So I don't know if that's making sense what I'm saying, but when 24 people have used it and it's repeat, then that means it's really not, it's not a big program that's serving a large group of people. I'm not trivializing it at all.
No,
At the nurse, I can tell you, working with adolescents, it definitely is needed. It's just the community is gonna have to say, we want this, but then we're also willing to pay for it, help pay for it, because the hospital can't afford to pay.
I would just add on to that is that, as we make these decisions, the question is how do we allocate our resources to the biggest and best outcome for the community as a whole? And we do these very small little programs that are predominantly Medicaid, you're gonna have a loss. And then the other thing is that if you don't have the regulations clear, that'd probably be a signal not to move ahead.
Yeah. So this program, the recommendations from where I sit is we've got to have, I think, an early evaluation of and some sort of idea of what the hell we're going to use this $60 million building that we built, and that's the, the trigger that got pulled about building this thing. Ultimately, that's the answer that, I can see, I would want to know, and I want to know, what are we going to do with that? That it's going to add value for the hospital. Right? And I don't know what the development time is on that, or if there's like 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 options of things that potentially we could use it for, but we need to have some sort of idea, not looking at not a stretch, but, realistically, what can we use this thing for? And then, with the idea of we're not have to spend any more money to get, you could put an orthopedic center in there to what cost, you could put OR in there to what cost, there's. Yeah, so, that's the problem is it's good money after bad, And so I would like that, at least by the next finance committee, I would say at least have a shell of an idea of what potential options.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree 100% with you that. From a financial standpoint, even if we didn't have an immediate use, financially, it's best to make a decision.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that we wait to make this decision.
Okay.
It just begs the question if we're gonna have this, this beautiful new building across the way that's, staring down the Taku winds, so.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to note that Jen Carson made a comment that said if they were able to take a voluntary use, their census would be higher. In case that wasn't so.
Involuntary?
Yeah, it's just a joke.
And through the chair, pardon me, I think that is correct. I think there'd have to be some pretty major revisions to make that a safe environment for an involuntary situation.
Yeah.
We're basically doing some mental health.
I do.
I really just want to point out that I really like that conversation we're having with staff here, because I really think that even though we know that if we de-shut the program on immediately, we're gonna have some relief as far as financially. But I think it's really gonna help the board make it really good informed decision on what options we're gonna have to be able to use that building, knowing that there is definitely option or definitely restraints on how we can use that building due to the debt services that we have on capital bonds.
Okay, next, Joe, Bob's.
Bob's. So behavioral health outpatient, this is a service that we've discussed numerous times. So for the budget, we have revenue of 1.06 million, expenses of 3.86 million with a net loss of 2.8 million for the program. This program is vital to core services. So the providers there also help cover call for the mental health unit. So we need Bob's in the long run. So we go down to two options, really, to reduce costs or subsidize permanently would also be an option if we can get there. Moving on down. So when we look at the program, it was kind of, this is my understanding, when we looked at this historically, it was initially set up to make use of the psychiatrists that were in excess of the mental health need, but required to cover the call, so you aren't burning out your psychiatrists. When we look at historically, in 2018, they had 4.12 FTEs in the program, which generated $1.2 million in expenses, $2 million in gross charges. But they were able to support the MHU at that level. Since then, it has grown significantly, some of that due to COVID, obviously. I know there was expansion in mental health programs across the board, kind of about that. But when you look at today where the program sits, we're at almost 14 FTEs in the program, $3.9 million in expenses on $2.1 million in gross charges. So while we've seen FTEs tick up, expenses tick up, charges have remained relatively flat over the time. I will give the caveat, there's some visit data up there that I pulled from our Meditech system. That's the only thing I haven't been able to validate 100%. Just to be totally transparent with everybody. So if we're projected to lose $2.8 million in FY25 on a payer mix that is 33% Medicaid, 52% commercial, 15% other. When we looked at who's using the services, it is predominantly CBJ. I think it was 98% CBJ residents using our BOP services. When we look at the analysis, there's a decreased expense in FY25. When you look at the budget compared to 24, most of that is driven by the use of employed staff versus good psychiatrists. So we've got rid of our locums at this point. When we look at the requirements for mental health, we've sat down with Jen, Dr. DeJoy, what's required to kind of support the MHU. They came to 5 provider total. So one of those is already in the MHU, and so we need 4 more, probably 3.5 to live in the BOPS, and that's support the call requirements for the MHU program. We do have one provider that is out in Finland, so that is giving us some current concern on how we'll staff this. Then looking at the community, there are some other services. I know there's leads redundancy across the board, but I know JME provides some mental health services. I don't know if Jen can talk about some of those services.
Before we get to that, I'm not sure that you've captured really what caused that change between 2018 and 2020. So in 2018, there was very little outpatient services being provided up there. Most of that was covering the mental health unit, correct?
Well, they did outpatient visits. We were seeing people in the BOPS building over there. So we were doing outpatients. This should mostly capture what was done in outpatient setting. So this was
this is just the outpatient side. But so the growth between 18 and 20 was COVID driven because we had to go to an outpatient model, right? And it was CARES funded, right? So while the charges are significantly less, there was CARES money that masked that, right? So we had ARPA money. It came in, and, you know, the hospital money. That expired in 22, right? And so starting in 23, we had expanded this program for a reason, and suddenly we didn't really need to be doing it anymore, and there's no reimbursement for it, right? So what you're proposing, if I understand, is taking this program back to a model of what it looked like in 2018, right?
Correct.
Okay, so we're not killing a program here, we're not eliminating it, we're just altering the services that we're providing based on what we need from the mental health staff, correct?
Yes, and when I talked to Ian about this kind of falls within the core services of the hospital. You know, it's required to do it, so we need to manage and reduce the expenses in this program to something that's sustainable.
Okay. So if that's the case, we're really not talking about something, when you go back to the decision matrix where we have subsidized, we don't really even need to subsidize it, do we? We just need to reduce the number of FTEs and what we're doing over there, correct?
And that's maybe something we can talk about too, is this something we want to keep moving forward, or we just want to put this back to management to take these changes forward?
That's where I'm heading with this, is that this isn't necessarily something that maybe I'm wrong, I'd look for somebody to tell me I am wrong. But we don't even need to take this to the assembly, right? This is more of a management adjustment that you guys are making to bring this thing back in line, right?
Since we broke it out, I think for
I got you.
completeness,
For budget purposes.
we wanted to make sure that you were aware of it.
Yeah. No, I follow you. And I understand the reason why it's here, but it's gonna get, I see us taking this one out, frankly. And I mean,
No, we would support that.
So
I would, Mr. Chair.
go ahead.
I would suggest that that we when we reach out to the assembly and probably not the community, but they saw the presentation that we gave at the budget. It was BOPS was on there. I would just give them a Cliff Notes version that we're sending it back to staff. This isn't a program that we're going to cut, and that there's no decision, but not just eliminate the discussion altogether when we meet with the assembly, so that they're prepared.
Maybe it wasn't clear what I was talking about, Deb, because I'm not saying we pull it out of the matrix. I'm not saying we even get rid of the slide. What we're talking about is when you go back to the recommendations on the prior page, we're not talking about subsidizing this program or potentially closing this program. We're talking about realigning the program to what the needs for the hospital are, right? Yeah. And it's the direction we're going. So it's that option of subsidize is where I got kind of hung out. But Ian, if it was easy for us to take it back down, because this is something that was brought up by David Keith as well, this exact same issue. And if it was easy, it'd been done already. So it's not easy to do, right?
Well, the first thing you have to do is diagnose the issues. Second, you have to have management will to deal with the issue. You take a look at this and look at the bookend years. Because in between with COVID, you got so much variance, but you are essentially making more revenue per FTE in the first year of the program. You are in an established program so many years over, if you just divide the number of FTEs and charges. So we've grown the cost side of it without the concomitant growth in the revenue side. Assuming that the charges are right, which is because you bill for them, you get a good sense of charges, and FTE is pretty good information. HR keeps a very tight number control on that. You can just see that this is a program where productivity has dropped, or payer mix, or some combination changed over the year. So what we want to do is go back to the original concept. The concept of this program was we need some of this, make sure that we have a viable program for inpatient psychiatric, called MHU, as well as, and that requires a number of physicians to take call pay 24/7. And that when they're there, we can actually use them to do outpatient visits when they're not, staffing in the hospital.
Yeah.
So we need to get back to that. There are other alternatives for psychiatric, private psychiatric services.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess getting back to the impediments to changing that and your point about, attributing the appropriate level of management focus on that is kind of where you are. Is what
I don't want to say what happened in the past, all I
I'm
know
with
is the first thing that just strikes me with this numbers is productivity of the physicians are way off. They're not doing as many cases. But we've actually added a number of FTEs, whether it's supported physicians. So we just need to kind of say, this is what we need, how we're going to staff it, how we're going to bill it, and get back to that and say, this is as big as the program gets.
So that plan of correction then, which is, I think what you're talking about, is that something that, what's the deliverable period for something like that, Ian? Are we talking 6 months to get it? I mean, you haven't been doing anything else, so that's why I'm wondering.
My belief is we need to be taking very specific actions over the next 2 months.
Okay. All right. So,
I'm sorry, I think we have some comment.
oh, yeah.
And I just want to let the finance committee know that Jen Carson has already started that process with scheduling and looking at providers, clinician schedules to get those more robust and in line. So she's working on that and has the template. So they're currently in the process of realigning as we speak.
Got it. So could we, considering what we're going to be focusing on over the next month, let's say through the end of June, is this something that for the July Finance Committee, we could come back to revisit what the plan is to get it realigned with, productivity levels and what you guys are working on?
Absolutely.
Is that reasonable? Okay, so would you just put that on the list? So the recommendation on this is going to be that, so going back, can you roll up another, there we go. So we're going to take subsidize and be an NA for this. Yeah. And really what we're doing is reducing costs. That really doesn't capture, does it, Kim? It's more realigning the program. Yeah, so we'll leave it as reduced costs, or you can slap in a realignment, reduced cost / realignment maybe on the matrix there, Joe. And then, but the recommendation that we're making to the board is that management will come back to us at the July Finance Committee meeting with the actions that they've taken and are planning to take to, get it down so we can reduce the costs. Is that fair? Does that sound all right to you, Deb and Shelley? And Jen?
It does.
Yes.
Okay. I'm seeing nodding there. That's great. All right. Okay.
Slide.
Yeah. Home health and hospice.
Home health and hospice, so looking at these budgeted numbers, these are the two of the programs that just stood up. So we had, on the revenue side, we only had 1 month's really good data to try to project. So we projected that based on 1 month's data, and that was considering we collecting 100%. So there is some pluses and minuses that we're trying to figure out, and that goes back to the data we're trying to get out of the system right now. Expenses are probably a little more established. These were FTEs mostly that were put in by Tim Stout. So on revenues of roughly $900,000, we had $2.3 million in expenses between the two programs. For a net loss, $1.3 million. And so we go down to the options matrix. We have the option to reduce costs, realign the program, subsidize and close all options. With obviously, when you talk about closing a program, can we find some other party to partner with that maybe could take this on like they did the AVP program? Going down to the next slide. The history of these ones is pretty fresh, and I'm going to go too hugely into that detail. We're going to look more at the current situation. So what we have in the financials there is kind of how we're operating year to date. May help me pull some of these numbers. And so we had pro forma, we had admissions for the program of home health of 75. We're actually seeing at 91. So we have a positive variance on that. Charges per episode of $3,864 actual. And then we go to the FY expenses and FY revenue. You can see that we are still operating at a operating loss for that program with expenses of $471,000 on revenues of $351,000.
Positive volume variance.
with the positive volume variance. So I think Ian and I both touched base on this. Home health is a tough program to make money on, so we've taken a program that was losing money under CCS. We moved it into an environment where we're required to pay 22% on retirement for PERS. We have a more robust benefit plan. We typically pay better salaries and wages across the board than competitors. So we kept the underlying economics for revenue the same while we increased the cost side by about 30% at the very least. And so this is going to be a tough program to make money on. So between this one and home health, I think we're gonna have a similar recommendation, but I'd like to flip down to home health and kind of go through that.
I mean, hospice.
Hospice, yeah, and then try to tackle them both at the same time.
Sounds good, okay.
Next slide. On the hospice side, we've talked about the length of stay issue that we continue to see there. So our length of stay is 27.8 compared to the national average 92.1. FY 24 expenses of 512,000 versus revenues of 345,000. Those are gross revenues, not net revenues. We are substantiating those numbers. So we do have a decent operating loss. It has the same problems that home health does. We brought it into a more expensive environment and premium benefits. When we look at the admissions for the program, our pro forma, we're well below the pro forma amount. And I understand those are tough to try to get the volumes right on when you're trying to pull in an area that you don't have experience in. But this is something that when it was established, there was a third party that was interested in coming to the area when we first took this program over. That historically that operates in the state of Alaska, the one we've talked to, that could potentially come in and operate this. I don't want to say better than us, but at a lower cost. Standard, I guess.
Both or just hospice?
I think the company will look at both, and that's for the reason of trying to cover call, right? And so when you have nurses for hospice, you're gonna cover call like you do with any other program. So you're gonna need 5 FTEs, at least probably 6 to really cover the call effectively, not burn out your nurses. I believe that's something that the CCS struggled with when they were having their staffing crisis. And so again, there are another 2 programs that we brought on board that it's unlikely that we'll ever be able to have a margin on. So I don't know if you just want to jump.
I would just add on is that Nate and I talked about the contract. The company that had been interested during the period in which CCS was looking at. So hopefully they, we haven't reached them, but hopefully if we do, they might have some interest in this. Divestiture, even if it isn't a sale, would be good for the community if they can run it at a better way than we can. Because there would be a focused, just solely on. I think that company is solely home health and hospice.
That's correct. And when they looked at it, Joe said they looked at it before. I didn't remember that they gave it did they give it a hard look back when CCS was wanting to? I thought that we came to a conclusion that there really wasn't anybody else and it had to be the hospital with it.
Through the chair, the conversations we had with this outfit centered on the idea of maybe a joint venture. We agreed and they agreed that the idea of trying to compete for this market for home health and hospice, there wasn't room for 2 competitors. So we started to go down the path of joint venture when we realized that the legal mechanism and procedural mechanism to try to establish a joint venture was either going to be an extremely lengthy or not realistic process. We let the company know that we were planning on going it alone, and they stepped back at that time.
So there wasn't really a solid consideration given to just having them do it and not the partner.
That's correct.
Yeah. So some other things to consider with these programs. We've had probably the most feedback on hospice. We had several people engage us on that and the importance of the program. So there's we're gonna get a lot of community feedback on this one specifically, I'd say.
Yeah.
And the 2 are closely tied together. There are some operational things to consider on home health as well. For when we discharge patients, there is some avenues where we get patients that might be more difficult to get outside the hospital without home health. We're trying to pull some metrics on that for consideration. as
So
well.
landing spot kind of.
Landing spot, yeah. So when I was talking to Jen yesterday, some of the specifics, like when you have to discharge a patient, and they need continued medication, but they don't have access to it other than to the hospital or home health, you get stuck with the patient in our building. So that's something to consider also as we start looking at critical access and average length of stay that's associated with that program, average daily census. We gotta have outlets for patients.
Can you go back up to the matrix? Sharon, go up 2 slides. So can we talk about each of the 3 options here? The reduced costs for home health, what is, and I don't know if you have to say that together, or home hospice and home health, or are there separate issues for each one of them where you can substantially reduce costs? I mean, I'm not talking a little bit, but is, how big enough, I guess, you know, how real is it to reduce costs?
It's probably actually limited. I mean, we could do some, but it's not gonna be material to the loss aspect.
You could probably get them out of the lease, that's $2,600.
Yeah, there's the lease, we might be able to. Probably just the lease, it's minimal. Reducing costs, there's small stuff there, but it's not.
Yeah, so, and that's part of the reason I wanted to, is that kind of consistent with your understanding too, Nate? I know you've put a lot of time into this thing, which we appreciate very much, by the way. But it's, that we don't have a lot of room. It's not like there's a lot of fat there. I mean, it's brand new.
Through the chair, no, I've met with Heather, who's on the line here, and Kim Stout. We've looked through, they've given me access to some of their reporting. I actually think with the patient volumes that we've had when we were first looking at this, what we projected for expenses on the pro forma largely has held up to what we're seeing. And, it's just, there's a couple of things that have come in. The cost structure of our, salaries and wages and benefits is a big part of that. And our ability to consistently have, things like the therapies available. The therapy load for our home health population is higher than we anticipated. And trying to grow those programs in organically without incurring a bunch of fixed costs has been a challenge too. And then our hospice patient population hasn't grown quite as fast as we thought it was going to. So I think this is a tough one because, as Joe had mentioned, a really important point, and why I think we need to talk about these programs together to an extent is there is a shared burden between hospice nurses and the health nurses. And if you only kept one, there would be a larger impact than treating them together.
Hold on just a second, Kenny. I just want to finish off this reduced cost thing. I think we should make that in a reduced cost for both of those, because it implies that, we can do things to really operate the program. And our interaction, you and I have talked about this in the past. Kim Stout has talked to the whole board about that. We're pretty familiar. And I there might be some small ones, but I just, reducing cost implies that, oh boy, we can really kind of fix this just by reducing the cost. And I don't think it does. So I would say that let's move that to NA. And I just want to, I'll get back to your promise, Kenny, because I just want to get to this point. For me personally, closing these programs is not an option. I think these are very important community programs, and the volumes, it's a whole different factor of volumes than we're talking about compared to prices, for example. And we either, that subsidize, the option that we're not seeing there is finding another operator, and if close was / finding another operator, then okay, or we change it for this one. But closing, we just need to make sure that nobody in the community thinks we're going to walk away from hospice at home.
That was our intent. It wasn't really, it'd be close to us. That makes sense, right?
Yeah, I get it.
It was not out of the community.
Yeah, I'm with you.
But there's no real good way to say that for how we make our decisions. But I mean, I could put,
I think in this case, I almost see a different operator as an option, though. I'm not sure how we capture that. I don't like, for these 2 particular ones, I do not like the close option. I hear what you're saying, that it's going to move it out of the hospital.
yeah, more of a change of ownership is what our goal.
Yeah, and maybe what we just change in the box in there is we just, other operator makes.
Close slash chow.
Yeah.
Change of ownership.
Change of ownership, there you go. And then, well, Kenny, why don't you go and then I'll talk about.
Actually, Max, I'm right on the same point that you were gonna say.
Okay.
Is that, I agree with you. These two particular programs, we've been in this community, when Catholic Community Services did close, home health and hospice, mostly hospice. I want to talk mostly about and how dire straits I believe our community was without having hospice. I think that hospice is something that with education, with our providers and with our community, we can fix this program and hopefully keep it here. I just want to say one more thing that Max said and just kind of capitalize on it. Was these two particular programs are exactly why we need to have Bartlett as a community hospital and to be run by the community, is because this is something that we were able to take over and to provide for our community. So I agree with Max completely that closing is not an option. So even if we have to take a loss until we're able to either find another operator or figure out another mechanism, I think it's really important that we put that out to the community and make sure knowing that home health care and hospice is not going away for our community.
So I don't want to get away from Shelley and Deb. Did you guys have anything you wanted to add at this point? Pop up. The subsidized, I mean, that's also, I would see that this is, potentially something we could, ask for direct subsidy for this thing too. But it seems like before we do that, the first step is to evaluate this third-party operator, and they've been around for a while. I'm just trying to remember, they've operated in the state a while.
For the charity, yeah, they have a major presence in Anchorage and Wasilla.
For both home health and
For
hospital.
both, and I've looked up their CMS data and their cost reports, and it seems like within the state of Alaska, they're probably one of the more viable operations around for those programs.
Got it. Are they nonprofit?
I don't know. I just don't recall. I have a fact sheet on their company that I.
Should we get more information for that, for the, I don't know if it's, how long would it take you to get us some information?
She get you this afternoon.
Oh, yeah. What I'm wondering is if when we talk about these slides in the full board meeting, you could have that information available and, at least information about, is it really an option? That's what I'm after. Is this really an option?
Through the chair, my only concern is I have engaged, with Ian's direction with some very initial conversations, but I would just want to be very conscientious about putting their information into public before we're ready. I don't want to give us our best chance of keeping that option as a viable option is the way.
Sure, yeah, I'm with you on that. But on the other hand, we also kind of have to have that idea, when we go out to the public with this stuff, we need to know some of those things too, right? So, maybe without getting, having it in the public, at least some evaluation of, does it look like this has some real legs or not, And if it does.
We'll re-engage with that party to see their level of interest and what sort of form they might want to engage with us on.
Okay. All right. So we can maybe just talk about that offline between now and the next meeting then. Okay. So you got the notes on the changes that we want to make around that recommendation. Okay. Any more on the slides? For having only spent 2 hours on this, not even, it's a heady issue. These are all serious issues, and I'm glad that we're taking time to really vet this through the public. I think that's super important on all these things. Okay, where are we on our agenda? We're getting there.
Through the chair.
Yeah, Shelley? Yeah.
So the only thing is we have all those slides, but we don't have anything addressing the loss with the hospital.
I can touch base on that if you want me to.
Say again?
I can touch base on the loss.
Yeah, go for it.
And so we've actually worked on making several changes in the hospital, and I intended to include that in the finance packet in March, but I completed it. It's gonna be ready for the April packet on all the changes we
Okay.
have. So we have made strides on affecting that loss.
Okay.
Then,
I think it's just important that when information's going forward, that that's also included, which you're got planned, so thank you.
So why don't you just bring us up to date on where we are on critical access?
yeah, so we engaged Charles Render. I'd worked with David Snowden already on the hospital. And so after initial discussions were positive, they took subsequent steps in our direction to look at Alaska specific rules and regulations to see able to move forward. And with that, my assessment of their findings, I actually came up with a complete step-by-step action plan on how we get to critical access status. So we have a 16-page document on all the steps we would need to take to get there.
Wow.
And I didn't, all the readings I didn't see any barriers. I mean, we'd have to have some operational changes or we'd have some findings and some surveys,
Okay.
but it's looking very positive at this point. So I think next step, after we do a final review of that with Ian's input onto that, it's probably gonna have to be engaged some other third party on some of these steps, because it's not gonna be a lift we're able to do in-house.
Sure.
Not in any time period, that's not 2 years.
I'm assuming that you would probably want a board resolution to change the status.
Yeah.
We could present what the benefits and the rest, there are risks of moving from one status to the other. There's operational changes, there's, we have to reapply for numbers, so our billing gets delayed until we have a survey.
That's the dumbest thing, I swear. The fact that they can't advance you somehow, the same thing we've been going through with Wildfire Court. I mean, I'm sorry, but really,
The cash flow through,
Right, that's why.
everything that you could do to slow down cash flow, they put there.
But we can work on getting all the pros and cons listed together and bring something back as soon as we can. I'd shoot for June. It might end up being July with all that other stuff.
Why don't we, well, let's just put the calendar that for July, Joe, because there's plenty of other stuff you guys are gonna have your hands full with.
Thank you.
And so that's good, that there's no deal killers in that. It's important though, in my understanding, and maybe I'll pose it as a question. Will that do anything to help rescue these other programs that we've been looking at?
It actually makes them more harmful to the core operations, because when you spread the cost-based payment across the whole entity, the cost of these programs goes way up, right? Because they're sucking off so much cost, it gets more and more expensive to run every single one.
Okay, thank you for that. So it's important to keep in mind that when we are talking about critical access, back to Deb's point, I'm sorry, Shelley's point, it's the column that's the hospital Wildfire Court is where this is value, right? It doesn't have any value. As a matter of fact, it has negative value with our evaluation.
Those are detrimental.
One just real quick question. Either one of you guys, have you experienced going from like what our designation is now and then going back to like a critical access hospital?
I've worked with clinics, we taken a clinic from standalone to a rural health clinic, which is basically going from a fee for service clinic to a cost-based clinic. There are some implications on billing. We have to do some billing holds, but I think there's some workarounds. I mean, you can keep billing as your current status, but then you just have to rebill everything, so it creates this huge amount of work.
So Max, have you been involved with that? Haven't you been?
Conversion?
Yeah, or
I've had clients that have been critical access, but not a conversion.
I thought we talked about that there has been some.
Yeah, so with Marty, Marty Michaels had some experience with one of the facilities on the Kenai.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you're thinking of.
Exactly.
The company that we engaged to do a cost report review, they have worked with another demonstration hospital in Kansas that just converted to critical access.
Oh, really?
And so they could.
Oh, we got a model.
Yeah, they have a model for it.
That's awesome. Okay.
That's exactly what I was trying to get at. Thank you.
It's the reason we have a 16-page.
Right.
Things, but what we have to do with that is, after Joe's done with it, we'll take a look at it and see what is legal, what's operational, what are the other things that we need to do and spread that out. So once a decision is made, know exactly who's gonna do what and the timeframe in which they need to do it.
Well, and ultimately, it's gonna be, the benefit side is gonna be so heavy. If we're gonna do something like that, we've gotta have a significant positive effect on bottom line. We're thinking we do. We still haven't done the real hard calculation on it, correct? Or have we?
We've done a good, pretty good analysis.
We've had several people do different analysis and they come real close to the same number.
Okay, all right. Great. Good, okay, so now we're gonna go back to our connection. Let's see, let's go back to our agenda, and we are now at ordinance 2023-14B AI. Item number 8.
The background of this one is,
Is that,
The slide, this is the motion for what we just covered.
where we had a motion, I don't know if you wanted to look at that. I think, you know, the action number will be just went through it.
okay, so what page is that in the agenda?
It is 17.
It's the 17th item or it's
Or 17th page, it's item number 9. Number 9 on the very bottom.
Not seeing it here right now. Oh, here we go. Okay, so we're on PDF page 17, Devin, Shelley. And so the question is, do we wanna make a motion? I guess that's number one, and Joe's got a suggested motion on the table here. I would suggest that we would want to make a motion, when I read this, as presented with the hospital administration recommendation, we need to capture the changes that were discussed.
So you'd amend it, yeah.
Yeah. So it'd be basically, I move the finance committee of Bartlett Regional Hospital advance the sustainability recovery plan as presented. With suggested amendments by the committee. To the full board for consideration of the May 28th meeting with request to open a formal period of public comment. It would be something like that. Deb and Shelley, what do you guys think about that?
I'm in agreement.
Do you want to make that as a motion then?
I do. I move the Finance Committee of Bartlett Regional Hospital advance the Sustainability and Recovery Plan with the amendments discussed today as presented, with the hospital administration's recommendations to the full board for consideration at the May 28th meeting, with the request to open a formal period of public comment.
Deb, do you want to second that?
I do.
Okay. No objection, any discussion?
Just a little bit of discussion here.
Yeah.
So with the recommendations of the administration, so the way that we got our recommendations today, they were verbal. Which was great. So are we gonna have the recommendations then written now, or are they gonna now become written on these?
Oh,
slides?
yeah, I think they will. I mean, we're gonna be amending the slides and including in the blanks, the recommendations. Okay. And it's the finance committees, it's the recommendations of management, but they're embodied in those, processes that are essentially what our recommendations are to the full board.
And it's basically just saying that we're recommending the timeline that's been set forward with the administration's recommendation, because it's really important that we just keep noting that we're asking for comments from the public and stuff. So yeah, I just want to make sure that we're catching.
Is that captured in the motion, do you think?
I believe so.
Okay. We'll call that motion good then. Okay, so let's go to the AI. So we're on page 34 of the packet.
So we're closing out CIP projects with the CBJ. Came up here. We were in they're transferring expenses on items that are already paid for back to the project so they can get a total cost for depreciation and closing out.
Okay.
One of the things that was purchased on our side, funded on our side was some furniture that was funded by the foundation.
Okay.
And so we need to appropriate those funds as we move the expenses, because those funds were never appropriated initially. So this is just appropriation for donated funds to close out this project.
Okay. Deb or Shelley, you guys want to make a motion for this?
I move that we, go ahead, Shelley. And I'll
I move the Finance Committee of Bartlett Regional Hospital approve the forwarding ordinance 202314 BAI to the Assembly for introduction on May 13th and ask for unanimous consent for the 74,000 BRH Foundation appropriation.
Second.
And I
Deb?
second. I do second.
Okay, no objection. Okay, that's approved. Next item, Joe?
The next item is the de-appropriation of the funds that were appropriated for the Juno Bones joints. So we have $8.1 million sitting in restricted CIP funds that we'd like to move back into operating funds at this point, since the purchase of that property is essentially done. So that's the gist of it.
Shelley or Deb?
I'm going to let Shelley make the motion. I am heading to the airport, so I'm listening and seconding.
Okay, Shelley, it's all on you, Shelley. Hopefully you're driving too.
I got it. I move the Finance Committee of Bartlett Regional Hospital approve the forwarding resolution 2023-14 BAJ to the Assembly for introduction on May 13th and ask for unanimous consent for the 8.1 million JBJCD appropriation.
I second.
Any objection? Okay, next item, Joe?
Next item, I believe, is the pass. So I pass that over to Kim. I gave her the action memo.
We don't have to go through all these slides. This was presented to planning and with the recommendation for it to finance, and our ask is to have finance to the full board. For approval and for funding to identify somebody to identify funding. I apologize that Paul's not here today to present. He had scheduled PL, so usually we want to have the subject matter experts giving their spiel here. But basically, we currently have the McKesson PAC solution, which is no longer upgradable. They did work, Paul and his team and others worked to get some quotes from other PACs providers. The current McKesson program, they were unable to provide a quote for us to see what would be to upgrade that our current platform due to them being hacked. So they did look at like 10 other vendors, and they found that Fuji and Agfa were the most compatible and with what we needed here at Bartlett, with actually Fuji winning out over Agfa. So it's, if you're familiar with the PACS, it's a picture archiving communication system. So all of our images get stored, and going with the Fuji system will allow us to do the upgrades we need. Will allow it to different modalities to be able to use this. So we could build to the future where wound care could store pictures in there, pathology could store things in there, and also cardiology. And our current system is at end of life, so it cannot be pretty much upgraded as much as possible without going through a complete platform change through McKesson. So the recommendation is to go with Fuji, which was ranked higher than Agfa.
Questions from Deb or Shelley?
No.
No, I've been through a couple of presentations of this and am definitely in support.
Okay, great. Can I just ask a question? Would you go down to slide 51 real quick? I unfortunately did not. I did read through this, but I didn't get a chance to attend the presentation on it. And I just want to understand, I guess the question I have on these, yeah, there you go, is this is the cost benefit comparison. I'm not gonna get into the detail. But it's such a wide difference, it almost begs that you kind of think that you're getting more from you would be getting more from AGFA than you are from, because it's like, God, what, I mean, how could they stay in business if they're competing on a level playing field for the same stuff? And why is that so much more expensive for AGFA? Do you know?
I don't know offhand. I think it's covered in the other documents in the decision in the packet, but I can get that information for you.
I didn't really get it out of there. I mean, I saw that they were both met the needs that you guys had, so I guess we should just leave it at that. Deb, do you happen to remember why or know why it's so much more?
Super expensive.
Maintenance?
I think it was the maintenance that was so expensive.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's the annual cost.
For the chair, if I recall as well, there was potentially some additional required hardware costs in out years that drove the total ownership cost up during the analysis period.
I don't have any other questions. Shelley, do you want to make the motion?
I will as soon as it pops up.
There you go.
Perfect. I move the Finance Committee of Bartlett Regional Hospital to approve the implementation of the Fuji PACS solution and move it to the Board of Directors for approval.
I second.
Okay, there we go. Okay.
Next, I want to make one comment here for Cynthia. So I just want to say that I actually have not sat through any presentations on this at all. I know I've had conversations a little bit about it with Ian. So when I saw this in the packet, this is probably, since I've been on this board, the most comprehensive update to a program that I've seen. And I just really want to express my appreciation to him, you and Paul and Joe and Ian for really putting this in the packet where I totally completely understood this. And if I can understand it, I believe everybody can understand it, and seeing what the benefits of the different vendors and everything. So I just want you to know, I really look forward to seeing this format in the future as we go forward, as we do upgrades.
Ian, thank you.
I would also echo my thanks to Kim for sponsoring this, as well as, Chris is, and that if you recall, one of the letters that I wrote to the board was about the disciplines, and one of the disciplines we wanted to instill was a discipline around IT and IT governance. Unfortunately, Paul was the first one to go through that, just because he was bringing such an important clinical system. The clinical systems of PACS are so important to diagnostic imaging, cancer studies, and it's just vital. And so we used this opportunity to develop and initiate our IT governance, which then we invited Deb just to sit in on that. And then it went to the planning committee, now the finance committee. And we hope that this level of rigor for these very important clinical systems are there, but it also means that every time they come up, you have an assurance that your IT individual has looked at this, understands its compatibility, understands how to work on the network, rather than a clinical person just saying, we need this. So this is about as a group, operations, clinicians, and IT to be able to make sure that this board has been fully vetted. We feel this is the most important thing to do in our IT. So
Thank you for that. Thank you. I think we did pass the motion, so we're good. So next thing on the agenda is a calendar meeting. We have it for the 21st. And we have this, hey, could you roll up to the second slide on the decision point document again real quick?
sorry, it's gonna be
Page 18. Probably really page 19, Jack.
Yeah,
That's what
yeah, just go down. So there we go. That's what I was looking for. So Kenny's talking about Kenny, pay attention because we're talking about you. So he mentioned before the meeting that he didn't like the 21st for the Bartlett Finance Committee. So what's your suggestion for that?
If possible. Possible, I'd either like to move it to that week still, either the 17th or the 18th of June.
Sure.
Yeah.
Aaron had some plans with, the 3-week open, you know, comment period. I don't know if we want to consider that as we try to send.
Yeah, no, that's what eating into
Because if it goes to the 19th, she's trying to have that period. I don't know if it's possible to do the 19th.
Can you be online, Kenny?
I won't be available.
I chew in front of
The
you.
17th is out for me. 18th is not good. I'm gonna have to move some stuff around. I'm gonna be traveling too. The 19th would be better, but is that an option for you?
I'm traveling that day.
Deb and Shelley, what does that week look like for you guys?
I cannot see my calendar, but in general, it should be fine. I don't have any travel plans.
Shelley?
I think I'll be good too.
So we're talking about moving it up, Aaron, with like the 18th would probably be the day.
So my one question, and I'm not super familiar with the process with the board for this, so apologies, but could we move the finance committee meeting up, but continue the public feedback period and then bring those to the full board before the meeting on the 25th? Or is it your preference that first go through finance? I guess that should have been my question.
Well, we'll be able to have at least one, right? We should be able to have at least one public meeting, right?
Yes, I would hope that before June 18th,
We'd have them both.
you'd have them both. I was thinking more of you also want to have like an asynchronous period where people can provide a written comment. And if you wanted to see all of that at
No,
one time.
I don't think that's necessary.
Okay.
I mean, we could do, when are you back, Kenny?
That's good too, Alex.
But if they don't need it for finance, then it's.
I am back that Saturday, the 22nd, so we could do the 24th. I know the board meeting's on the 25th.
We could move the board meeting back a couple of days too. Having a little extra room for this whole thing might be a good thing. I'm just thinking that. You know, we could do the board meeting on the Thursday. And do the finance committee on the. Oh God, that's a ring.
Sorry.
And then you know, that's super tight for Sharon to turn minutes and. That's, yeah.
I
like the 24th the best, and then you can decide if you want to push the board meeting back. And just because it'll give us more time, we could even have May results. Get April and May at the same time.
I'm fine with that next. On the
How about that? Deb and Shelley, 24th,
I'll probably be out
What
on
day
my,
of the week is it?
Monday.
That should be fine.
I'm gonna be out on my boat, but as long as the Starlink works, that should work.
Well, we better make sure that you don't have Elon Musk on your, you know. Yeah, so yeah, you change that to the 24th and Sharon.
Yeah, June 24th.
With that being said, Aaron, too, if we're gonna do anything, I want to make sure that we don't do any kind of a board meeting on the 19th to the 21st, because Max and I won't be here. And
Sure. I'll connect with Anita and figure out the best way. Between now and then to either get you guys a poll to figure out dates and then cross-reference that with leadership staff here with the goal that we could set aside 2 evenings where we could have the majority of folks available to participate if possible.
That's great. We're adjourned. Sorry.
Nice work on the presentation, guys. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Perfect timing. I'm just walking into the security.
Safe travels.
Thanks.
Try to get this in pretty early next week and shoot back over. Okay. Yeah.
This is south.